Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Super-Fanta-Fi. This being a show to talk about TV shows of the supernatural, fantasy, and or science fictional genre. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about Lost in Space Season 3, Episode 7. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Well, first and foremost, we have the Robinsons finally finding their way to Alpha Centauri after their long journey. You know, it's like, oh, it's beautiful, but obviously there's the melancholy of like, right, we're not here under the best circumstances. Alpha Centauri is about to be attacked, plus Will is in his condition, so it's not like, oh, like everything's copacetic. It's not the great arrival that they were hoping it would be. But obviously the robot has to stay behind, and obviously you had Smith saying like, hey, before I get off this ship, everything is good between us. She's like, Will's life is in danger. Potentially there's going to be like a war because those robots are on their way. We're about to have an invasion, and you're worried about your circumstances. She's like, yeah, kind of, you know, got to focus on what she can. So it's just like, right, things are going to work out the way they are. You know, karma has a way of, you know, people getting what they deserve, which you can hear, you can see the look on Smith's face being like, yeah, I'd kind of done a lot of terrible things, you know? So that kind of, so when the opportunity presented itself, well, she actually went inside, but she found the captain that she poisoned last season. She saw him and she ran because she's like, right, like she avoided Samantha. I'm curious, like, we didn't touch on because we did have the time skip, but I'm assuming she still like that entire year she probably avoided Samantha like the plague, but they didn't have enough time to probably like build that all into the final season. I mean, I don't know, maybe they had like only so much they could put into the final season, but I didn't even think about that till now, because I mean, last season she was avoiding Samantha, and when she found out like who Samantha's dad was, it's like, oh, he was the man that I killed, like I let him get sucked out of the airlock. So you know, so last thing she wants to do is be around him. So around the captain she poisoned, like a reminder of all the terrible things that she done. I mean, granted, I guess like she was afraid like if he ever made it out of his condition, he'll tell people what I did and what I was responsible for, or just maybe it's just, once again, her consciousness getting the best of her, so she wants to bail out of there. So she goes, quote unquote, home. But no matter how far she runs, she can't escape herself, because I'm jumping around a little bit, but when she does run into the robot, she's like I know, like, you know, you want to just say that you are like all the bad stuff that you've ever done, but the fact of the matter is there's good in you, so let me help, and the robot walks past her. I think that's indicative of many different things, like, right, the robot never bothered asking you for help because the robot didn't think you were trustworthy enough to actually help. And so I think maybe that hit her to her core of like, right, her and the robot did have a special relationship at one point in time, but to be fair, that relationship was a byproduct. Like, Will's relationship with the robot was genuine. Yours was a byproduct of manipulation, even using the robot purely for the purpose of giving yourself some defense. He was your contingency plan, which contingency is the word of the day in this regard, but we'll get to that in a second. But I think that's so interesting, though, that I think that moment with the robot is what shaped everything, because it's like, right, no matter how far she runs and how hard she tries to pretend to be someone else, she is who she is, and she's done the things that she's done, and like, she has to choose to stop running from the things she does and finally accept the consequences of it. I think that's kind of indicative of what that all kind of means for her, because like when it's all said and done, I'm jumping around, but when the situation's cleared, she returns, she's like, I'm gonna go back to work. And she has like stuff from the first aid kit. I'm assuming she's gonna, like, she knows the means necessary to help him. Like, it could be indicative of she's gonna go back and kill him so that the last ties to her past are done. But it's like, no, she's gonna go back and help him, and whatever consequences happen befalls her. It's like, right, I deserve it because I've done what I've done. But for the first time, I need to try and stop making things worse, trying to cover my tracks. I need to just do the right thing for just doing the right thing's sake, you know? So, because every time she's ever tried to do the right thing, it's always been, she always has an ulterior motive behind it, you know? So, it corrupts your intentions. When you don't have the best of intentions from the beginning, it will eventually corrupt your action. So, like, it's not like, oh, if you're doing something good, if you don't have the best intentions behind it, if you have corrupted intentions behind it, then the result is going to be warped and corrupted in its own right. But other than that, luckily the doctors were able to see Will. And the sad thing is, like, you know, they got to Don and they're like, whoa, are you a family? And he was like, no, I guess I'm not. So he had to stay outside with Smith, but he wanted to go in with the rest of the Robinsons. But they ultimately end up working on Will. They end up giving him an artificial heart, which, like, Penny was kind of worried about. It's like, whoa, like, because one of Will's strongest things is his heart. And she's like, you know, Judy's trying to say, like, right, like, she knew plenty of people because of Earth's atmosphere situation, like, things happening on Earth, like, that the pollution was having its effect on people's lungs. And so, but she's like, people were perfectly fine after getting artificial lungs. She's like, it doesn't matter whether his heart's artificial or not. That's what not matters. It's like believing in it. And like, out of anyone, Will has the strongest like sense of and power of belief. And so Judy's not worried about like artificial heart or not. It won't replace, it won't like, that won't change for Will. Will still be Will through and through, you know? But obviously, John's coming at this situation. Well, before we even get to that later on, they're trying to find a defense mechanism because they end up talking to, Victor and then eventually the Chancellor who runs things in Alpha Centauri about defense mechanisms. Like, they were busy building infrastructure. They never knew that they were going to need like a defense mechanism, so they never worked on it. But when they looked at the power grid, like, Maureen's like, things aren't like, there's so much more power being produced than necessary. And so they go to Hastings, which I'm like, man, because like, where's the cells? I'm like, who's going to be waiting for you in the cells? I'm like, there's your boy Hastings. I was wondering, I meant to bring it up earlier in the season. I'm like, I'm surprised we haven't seen anything because we know he's still alive. But it's like, like the moment they got the Alpha Centauri, the bastard got locked up, rightfully so. And now it's time for him to, they know that the extra power grid is because he's got stuff hidden away. The man's got, as John says, and it's the title of the episode, contingencies on contingencies. There's so many things he's got planned out. And he's like, right, I do have a defense mechanism set in place, but I'll only operate it if you talk to the Chancellor and say that this is some huge misunderstanding and get me reinstated to my position. And it's like, right, there's no way you would have just trusted yourself. You had to trust someone else. But he's like, nah, the only other person who would have that information, you know, I'm the only one alive with that information, so you have to work with me. It's like, of course they don't want to work with me. Because he's like, I think he was trying to say, like, I reached out for you guys, but you ignored me for, like, a year. So now all of a sudden you want to talk to me. It's like, yeah, because they need you. If they didn't need you, they wouldn't have come to you, you self-centered bastard. Because he'll justify, like, you know, Smith will at least admit when she's doing stuff, well, she'll try to guise it in the fact that she's doing it for other people, but it's like, no, she'll also make it clear, like, it's all about me. He tried to make it seem like everything he did was for the greater good, but it's like, once again, it was all for him, so that's why, like, there's parallels that could be, you know, definitely that's why him and, Smith kind of got along a little bit. Once again, a little bit of difference is she has a little bit more of a conscience, but, John shows up to his place, and he's trying to get a password for the defense mechanism, but then John notices some red lights. He thinks it's a robot, but by the time he got out there and realized, like, something's up, he came back, and Hastings was there. It's like, man, you poor bastard. Literally brought you back just to kill you off immediately. It's like, but it's also like, man, what Judy said earlier in the episode about karma, it's like, it came back to kind of bite you in the ass, because you were also like, yeah, the defense of this place, which you are at, you were trying to, barter and bargain, you know, with survival. I mean, once again, Smith kind of did very similar things, the exact same thing. So it's like, once again, you're not different in that capacity. But with this situation happening, they're immediately thinking the worst. They're thinking that the robot's responsible. When the time came, though, Maureen didn't tell Will anything about it. It's like, right, we're with Alpha Centauri. The robot's here too, like, not telling him about everything. It's like, oh, Hastings, yeah, we had to go to him about something, but he's not cooperating. Don't want to, because at the time it seemed like the robot was the one that killed him. But Will felt bad because he's like, yeah, like everything I did, you know, Saw already knows his way to Alpha Centauri, and I thought I could change things, but I failed. And I think it's interesting because I forgot to talk about it. I want to say last episode, Maureen had this line because Penny was like, maybe Will's right, but Maureen said the line of, someone who thinks they're the only one with the answers typically ends up being wrong. She was coming from her own perspective because she always, for a long time, like, as a lesson she kind of learned for this past year, but it's just like she always felt like she had the answer, and it's like, nope, it never worked out. So that's kind of like, you know, it's almost seemed indicative in this moment too, of just being like, it's understandable, like, you were just trying to do the right thing. So it's not like she was blaming her son. It's like, you know, But Will needed to do one more thing, so he talked to Ben's family, his wife, and his children. It's like, right, you probably know about me because of the robot. I mean, but it's like, I wasn't, but most people don't notice, but your dad, he was friends with a robot too. His name was Scarecrow. And because of what your dad did to save him, like, Scarecrow made sure that me and all the other kids of the 24th colonists were able to get away. So your dad's a hero. And even at the end, you had Ben's wife saying, like, right, that we could use more heroes with everything that's going on. But that inspired Will to be like, oh no, I know what the like, that him and Maureen and Grant were working together with this. And he ultimately figured out Hastings and Ben were working together, so that's why he was saying, like, right, the only person alive that has access, who would have had access to it, is Ben, but he's gone now. So what they basically ended up doing is getting audio files, like from home videos or voicemails and stuff like that, because he had to have said all those words at some point in time, recorded, because it needs to be voice activated, because we learned a lot of really interesting things. I mean, obviously, like, Maureen and Grant working together after so long, because they haven't really had a lot of time together. Once again, they haven't had the whole, like, once again, complicated, weird thing of, right, Grant, John, and Maureen being around each other. It's usually like, yeah, because, like, John immediately went off to deal with the robot stuff while this happened. But Grant ended up revealing some interesting stuff. Because last episode, they brought up the fact is that the Fortuna's, like, all its data location stuff was erased. And you're like, why was that? Well, it turns out the Fortuna's wasn't on a mission for Alpha Centauri. They were actually on a covert mission about the rifts, the same rifts that open and close because of the alien engine. Well, that's what their secret mission was to look into, because, like, right, last thing you want is to kind of scare your civilians, so that's why there was no trace of the mission that they were on. Like, even Mission Control didn't know what we were up to, but they were sent to investigate it, and hence why they ended up in the circumstances they are. I also think it's interesting, too, like, I could be mistaken, like, the rest of his, I'm assuming maybe they have been awoken, I just haven't really noticed it. They haven't made a point of it, but the rest of the Fortuna's crew is awake. I would assume at this point in time, it's just they haven't really. Maybe there's some of the people we've met, and I've just never really realized it at the time. But because that's why Grant knew exactly, like, that there's, like, it's a voice acted thing, the passwords, but it needs to be in Hastings' voice. Hence why they had to try and find Ben, because Hastings was dead now, so there's no one else's voice that could activate the defense system. But they found Ben's recording in the voices in those different recordings. And Grant and Maureen had conversations about, like, right, why didn't you ever tell me about Judy? And she was like, I tried to. And it's like NASA figured that it'd be kind of a cruel distraction to kind of bring that up just because you could potentially have been gone for decades. He was like, no, the Maureen that I know, regardless of anything, would have fought to kind of say something at the time. But she was like, well, at the time you weren't that interested even in a committed relationship, let alone a family. Like, you know, if I had said something like, what would be different? It's like, well, for him, it's like, for you, it's been 20 years, so you have that perspective. But for me, it was just yesterday. He's like, I went to sleep a boy, woke up a man. And obviously, Maureen thinks, like, right, same thing kind of happened to Will in this past year. And, you know, Grant's like, at the end of the day, your kids, you did a great job. She's like, I didn't do it alone. I was like, right, John, seems like a good guy. He is, you know, we've had our ups and downs, but you know, it is that thing of, like, now Grant's in that position of, like, he's going to definitely be more in Judy's life for that parenting type of situation. But it is still kind of complicated. Like, right, but it's like, he also knows, like, Judy wouldn't be the strong person she is if she didn't have, like, Maureen and John in her life. So he is appreciative of, like, John being there to fill that void. Like, you know, once again, he didn't even know Judy existed. But, I thought that was just kind of an interesting conversation, like, to finally have that. Because they haven't really had time to just sit back and talk. Once again, it's just been one thing after another. Speaking of that, you had VJ and Liam both trying to surprise Penny. And there was those flowers that bloom. They, like, sound like music when they bloom or whenever wind blows on them, but they smell like crap. And VJ had secretly gotten her some Oreos, but Liam's, like, kissing her and stuff, and so VJ was just kind of like, right, like, he backed down when the time came, so. But it's up to Penny and Judy, because they want to believe the best in the robot, because they're like, right, if the robot's going rogue, it's most likely because SAR's controlling it. Granted, that's not going to be an option anymore, because the only other robot Will connected to was Scarecrow. Without Scarecrow, SAR can't make that link anymore, so he can't, but they didn't know at the time, like, they don't know at the time, like, how that works. We as the audience do, but Which Maureen was like, right, you're kind of only telling me this now. It's like, right, there's just been so many things at a time. Like, we didn't really, there's a lot to kind of process, Mom. We've been dealing with literally one thing after another. We've never had a moment to fully catch our breaths, you know? But, they decide, like, because Penny believes the best in the robot. Like, don't we have shouldn't we go and see for ourselves and find out the truth about, you know, what's going on? So we got to find him before we get to the robot. I thought the person they were going to turn to would be Smith, because next to Will, well, technically Penny, then I guess maybe Smith has, like, the better, like, relationship after Penny when it comes to the robot. I still think all the Robinsons, even Dawn, still comes before Smith, but regardless. They turn to Dawn for help, though, and he's like, no, I'm a working member of, you know, society now. Like, I can't be up to this illicit stuff. And it's like, well, you were a smuggler. It's like, oh, okay. So this is one of those moments where, like, oh, before you judge me and everything for being a smuggler, but now you need my help because I'm a smuggler. He's like, the fact of the matter is, if I help you guys, it's just going to get me in trouble. And they're like, right, but if everyone finds out that you know what we were up to and didn't help, and he's just like, all right, fine, whatever. So he's like, right, there's only certain places that a robot could hide, and, you know, VJ shows up because he wants to help out as well. Truth be told, he wants an excuse to be around Penny, because, like, right, if the alien attack is coming like you say it is, this might be my one and only opportunity to say something to you. So he's trying to make it count. So he's tagging along as well, which Don's immediately like, oh, I know what this is all about. Okay. And even as they're like, eventually they have to go on foot, and he's talking to VJ like, why are you back here with me? And he's like, oh no, like, he's like, shouldn't you talk to her? It's like, yeah, but, you know, he doesn't think there's much to say, but Don's like, hey, you know, like, you got to think of it like smuggling. He's like, you got to find out what she want and show that you're the person that can get it for her, and just kind of taps him on the chest, being like, yeah, just like do it. Like, you're spending your time back here with me, a guy who hasn't bathed in a couple days, rather than being with the, you know, talking to the girl you're obviously crazy about. So the robot made his way to the dam, and by the time the others finally got their way there, they found out, like, wait, these marks aren't the robot. There are other robots here. So the whole plan was potentially to, because they knew what the humans would do. That's why they were, I mean, to be fair, they were saboteurs. Like, because the question kept being, why is it that the robots haven't shown up yet? They've got technically a head start, but by the time Maureen and them, once again, maybe it's a space-time continuum thing of, like, because by the time they went through the warp drive, like, the others kind of had a head start, because, like, by the time they come out the warp drive, like, how much time had passed. Like, you don't really go into the ins and outs of that, but because, like I said, they had, like, maybe, like, a 30-second head start. But it's like, how did you... But I guess it's like, truth be told, is they've technically had a much larger head start, because the moment they scanned Dawn, they had all the information they needed. So he probably reported to the others, like other nearby robots, the location. They warp-drived over there. They snuck onto the planet. In particular, all they had to do was sneak into the dam, because Alpha Centauri doesn't have any defense mechanisms. So this small group of saboteurs came in to disrupt things, like exploit some weaknesses. So I guess absorbing all the information it could, Sar got everything from Scarecrow before killing him, so he already knew about Hastings being the one in charge and probably having the information. So it's most likely a thing of, like, that's why he in particular was targeted, because it's like, because Scarecrow was around him and been enough to, like, pick up on what they were saying and probably having recordings and memories of it. Because unlike Robot, who doesn't have memories beforehand, like, Scarecrow had memory of all that time, you know. So that's probably how they were able to kind of perform their covert operation. So initially, Judy was going to, like, swim, because to get to the turbine, like, basically explode one of the turbines to make it so that it wipes out all the other robots. Don was suggesting, like, he was going to be the one to do it, but Judy's like, I'm the one with the best breath control. And he's like, but Don's like, you do all that type of stuff when you're protecting your family. And she's like, Don, what do you think you are? And I think it's that moment of him hearing that, like, because he just thought, like, oh, I was alone for the ride. Like, we hear a little about his family circumstances, but I think this is, like, the only real family he's ever really, you know, had. Like, same thing kind of like Smith in a regard. So I think for him, he needed to hear that, and then, like, oh, I am part of the Robinson family. I'm not just an outsider looking in. I'm just as much a part of this. So Judy was going to sneak in there and try swimming, but the robots were already waiting. Luckily, robots showed up to, but luckily he took the others out. Fight smart, not hard. And so he just used the water to, like, wash them out. So, I guess that was enough to potentially, like, well, because they could swim and stuff like that, but I guess maybe the fall and all that, or at least they got washed away before things went bad. John had come there with, like, intentions of, like, you know, because Victor was with him, was like, yeah, I think it's interesting that you're not so forgiving of the robot. You, out of anyone, had always been his biggest defender, but for him, it's like, just because it's more human doesn't mean it replicates humanity. For him, he preferred a robot when it was just a robot, because at least then it was more reliable, because now it has its own emotions and it can make its own choices and stuff like that. It can make mistakes like a human instead of making mistakes like a robot. But at the end of the day, like Victor was just saying, like, right, the thing is, humans about us, we have the capability of forgiveness, you know, and at the end, like, John was like, oh, you want me to forgive the robot? He's like, no, I want you to forgive yourself. Like I said, he's just deflecting. Yes, he's mad at the robot, but and it finally comes out. He's like, the fact is, let me know when your son puts himself in danger right underneath your nose, even though you're trying to protect him. But Victor was like, they're not kids. They survived on their own for like a year. And he was like, yeah, but we took their childhood away from them. It's like, they should be children. They shouldn't have to grow up the way they did. They had to all grow up so fast. And because he already has this complicated history of feeling like he already let his family down, not being there when they needed him most. And it just takes him back to that. Like, my son, like, was holding all this weight on his own. So, but when the time comes, he talks to the robot and he's like, was that all of them? And the robot's like, yes, John Robinson. Because, like, John realized this is like, right, I'm a little upset with you, but I'm mainly more upset at myself. I'm like, I recognize that all you've ever done was try to protect my family. So the robot showed up to protect everyone. It's like, right, he saved the day. The question then becomes like they had suggested, like, oh, maybe they were trying to frame the robot, because it's like, right, he is the only one on this planet, so they probably made sure to wait till he got here before they did stuff, because if anything went down, it'd be like a little suspicious, like, oh, there's no robot here. But it's like, right, if robot's here and they start causing problems, then he'll take the heat and blame for it. So sadly, the turbine situation, they'd already done enough damage, so without it, everything shuts down, including the power grid. And in that very moment, waiting for the opportunity, a ship appears outside. I guess like the one leading in charge, and I'm assuming SARS on it. Now it's time for them to strike, just when the humans are at their most vulnerable to an extent. So we also had, like, really quickly before I end this too, VJ kind of confessing to Penny. He's like, right, I'm not a smuggler. And she's like, okay. He's like, yeah, I'm like the type of guy who can get what you want, get you what you want. He's like, I'm not like the tall guy or who can pull off, you know, a man bun without looking stupid. He's like, that's not who I am. But he talks about, like, what he likes about Penny, her being unique, her being special, her being infuriating sometimes, but what he likes about her. And it's like, for him, it's like, he had to accept the fact that they were friends, but that's been, like, the hardest thing, especially this past year for him. But, you know, even if it's like, we don't ever get together, but why are you with someone like Liam? Like, you should recognize yourself to be the hero that you are. That you don't need anyone to play hero for you, because you're already one for yourself. So, like, why are you with a guy like Liam, who is a bit of a showboat and stuff like that, trying to be your hero? Because he'd even said, like, oh, like, what kind of, like, guy would leave the girl he cares about behind? But it's like, no, like, Penny has proven herself time and time again since the very beginning that she is, you know, brave enough, tough enough to do anything on her own, you know, even save her family when the time comes, you know? But VJ's like, no matter what happens, like, you know, just promise me that when you finally realize it yourself, that I get to tell you I told you so. She's like, yeah, I don't see that happening. Because she's always been a little lacking in self-confidence in that regard. Because she feels like, compared to Will and Judy, she's nothing special. But it's like, yeah, you have your own special traits that can only be you. I mean, that's even why Judy was like, yeah, you need to talk to the robot. She's like, why me? He's like, next to Will, you have the best relationship with him. And she's like, yeah, I've always been by your side, but you still don't listen to me, Judy. So, but it's like both of them feel like they can't be the right person for them. It's like, oh, I'm not the person that, like, despite how I feel about you, I'm probably not the right person for you. But she was also saying the same thing of, like, right, I'm not the person you think I am. Kind of like, you giving me too much credit. So I think they're, in a weird way, they're both kind of saying, like, oh, they're not deserving of each other, which is kind of sad. So we'll see how that plays out. With the way things are, I'm almost like, is this really the series finale next? Because it feels like there's still so much room for so much more, but, you know, maybe everything is going to be end-all, be-all next episode. I didn't see anything saying like, oh, part 1, so I assume this is the end. To be fair, a lot goes down in those season finale. Like when you rewatch the season 2 finale, I was like, oh. I was like, really? Because when I was getting to the episode, I was like, oh, none of this has happened yet. I was like, wow, a lot went down in that season 2 finale that I just didn't remember, like, it all, like, happening. Like, I would have thought some of that would have been connected, like, part of a previous episode. I was like, no, it was all squeezed into the season finale, so it's going to be interesting to see. Like I said, I didn't see anything. I kept seeing 8 episodes, so it seems like the next episode will, in fact, be the series finale. So it's definitely going to be interesting to see how this all plays out as the aliens make their move. The final battle potentially is underway. It's definitely going to be interesting to see how it ultimately all plays out. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Until the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.